Hey everybody, my name is Will Sutherland, and I am a PhD student at the University of Washington here in Seattle. And I'm going to talk about reproducibility, but specifically I'm going to talk about how reproducibility is understood and practiced through a set of data tools and data work practices that are emerging in the sciences around computational reproducibility. And this was a project that I worked on with my wonderful collaborators, Melanie Feinberg, Beth Nelson, Mohammad Jarrahi, and Arcot Rajasekar. And it centered around a workshop that was meant to teach these sorts of data tools and practices to researchers in the natural sciences for the most part, mostly PhD students and postdocs in fields like genomics, bioinformatics, physics, material sciences, chemistry. There were also a couple of computer scientists as well. And it included things like using the cloud with Amazon Web Services, versioning with Git, Jupyter Notebooks, and containers, which I'll talk about a little bit more. And I sort of engaged this, we engaged this phenomenon by, I participated in the workshop as a student. So I sat through all of the class sessions, I did the homework, I was on a project group, we reproduced an analysis as a group project. And Beth Nelson also was observing through all the class sessions, and so we were able to sort of compare notes. And I would love to talk more about the sort of methods that we used on this to get to the findings that I'm going to show you. But for time's sake, I'm going to leave that to questions afterwards if you have questions about it. And also, please go read our paper. So one of the things that emerged in this workshop was an understanding of reproducibility as a kind of recapitulation of a finding. And so this was really taking a computational analysis and running it again from start to finish under, as much as possible, the same sorts of circumstances as before, right? And so this is one of the participants speaking in this kind of mode about reproducibility. So he's saying that another researcher should be able to take my data, which is open source and publicly available, run through all the analyses and produce the same outputs, right? And so this very much reflects a notion of reproducibility that's been discussed in the literature as direct replication. And it's really running the sort of exact same analysis under the same circumstances and verifying that a result has come out at the end, right? And this was very closely tied to containers, these container technologies, because what a container will allow you to do is to take a piece of software or a workflow and a software analysis and kind of stick it in a box along with all of its dependencies and environmental factors that need to be set. And then you can just hand that box off to somebody else and they can rerun the analysis from start to finish. And so this was an understanding of reproducibility, really enacted an understanding of reproducibility as a kind of automation of rerunning the exact same analysis and verifying a result that comes out at the end. But there was another understanding of reproducibility that emerged in the workshop that was much more centered around reuse. And so this was about being able to hand off a workflow or a computational analysis to another researcher and have them use it for slightly different circumstances, right? To do the same kind of analysis again, to use it as a tool in some sense. And this was much more closely related to what Schmidt calls conceptual replication as opposed to direct replication, and what Cartwright simply calls reproducibility as opposed to replication. And so this understanding came very directly out of the kinds of laboratory and research group environments that these participants were working in. And so this is one of our participants explaining an understanding of reproducibility in this sort of mode. We have difficulty reproducing people's work, and that's a very standard problem, I think, that goes across fields. It's challenging in my lab to have knowledge transfer between generations of students and postdocs because of the size of my lab and because of the structure of it. And so what he was very much concerned about is this problem of handing off an analysis, a tool from across sort of generations of grad students in a high turnover lab or between labs, right? And sort of enabling this analysis to be used in sort of future work to build off of that analysis. And so this was very much a notion of reproducibility as a kind of reuse. And participants in the workshop were able to switch between these two understandings of reproducibility fairly unproblematically. They didn't see a whole lot they didn't really distinguish between them very strongly at all. And so our point here is not so much that the term reproducibility can be an ambiguous term. I think that's been observed. And there's been a lot of work trying to delineate, what is reproducibility. But our point here is sort of that when we build tools and systems for reproducibility, a lot of times they're motivated by this notion of a reproducibility crisis. But what we're seeing in this workshop is that what people are really interested in these tools, in a lot of cases, has much more to do with a crisis of having to collaborate around these really large, tangled code bases that are developed by PhD students and people who are coming and going from research labs. And so what we want to point to here is the way that when we build tools for reproducibility, they enact certain understandings of reproducibility, and they enact certain criteria for what constitutes good scientific work, right? So when we build a tool for reproducibility, are we trying to support a rerunnable analysis or a more sort of a reusable analysis, right? And how do computational tools for reproducibility enact those different understandings? So I hope that there are a lot of questions about this, and please, again, go read the paper.